Hey everyone, it's Michelle here. So, I've had a few people ask me about RSD, and some of you are interested in hearing my hot take on how to move through this. So, let's talk about rejection sensitive dysphoria, or what we call RSD. Before I start talking about this, know that what I'm going to say is going to shift your perceptions. It might feel like some ego resistance, and that's okay. But if you can come into this with an open mind, you're going to get a lot more out of it than if you want to look at RSD, and in fact, anything about ADHD for that matter, with a very narrow lens. If you've worked with a coach or a therapist, you're going to find that the way I see and do things very different. And that's why I get results, but it's also very new. And so some brains adapt to different and new ways easier than others. So I just wanted to prepare you that this probably isn't anything that you've heard before. So let's get on to RSD. This is a biggie for a lot of us. We see it especially in women with ADHD, but even in people without ADHD. This is something common to all of us on some level, particularly women, and particularly women who identify with the symptoms of ADHD. Okay, so what is rejection sensitive dysphoria? Well, like it sounds, we are feeling sensitive to a perceived rejection, and we're feeling uncomfortable with that. So it's when you feel this intense emotional pain from even just a perceived criticism. Like, even if someone isn't really criticizing you, those of us with RSD have a tendency to interpret comments that way. And that can hit us hard. So let's start right at the beginning. This often, in fact, I would say almost always, starts in childhood. As children, we misunderstand neutral events and we blame ourselves for things that were never our fault. And when I say neutral events, what I mean are situations that weren't inherently good or bad. So, for example, let's say that a parent comes home in a bad mood and they're snapping at you for making noise. This event, in and of itself, isn't good or bad. Dad snapped at me, and that's it. But it's the idea and perception that we overlap onto that neutral situation that make us think, oh, this is bad. Because when we're little and someone is mad at us, we instinctively think that means I'll no longer be taken care of. And when we can't take care of ourselves, it's dangerous for us to believe or to even think that someone has found fault with us. So we label this neutral situation as bad. So in our brains, the way that it goes is good is happy and bad is angry. So then, as a child, we try to find ways to explain to yourself how dad's mood was precipitated or invoked by us. So in this case, we might think, I must be really annoying, or I'm always in the way, instead of understanding that your parent's mood was unrelated to you. Our young minds interpreted dad's reaction in a way that made us feel responsible or at fault. So what I want to talk a little bit about first is if you have children, you probably understand this. So if you're in a really bad mood, something has happened that has nothing to do with your children, and they come to you and they're really excited, mommy, 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 watch me, watch me. And we might be getting frustrated. We might say, not now. So it's not that they're coming to you asking for you to pay attention to them that's making you frustrated. It's just that maybe they've said it a million times already, or maybe there's something else going on, or maybe you're tired, or there could be a whole lot of things. Maybe you're otherwise dysregulated. But certainly, you would never look at your child and say, you're incredibly frustrating, right? We would never say that. And nor do we even mean that. So if we can look at that from our perspective and then see that in our parents' perspective, well, we get how our child can interpret it in a way that makes them feel as though, when they're very little, that could make them potentially feel as though they're frustrating, right? Now, that's not to blame us. We're not here to do that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the first thing that I want to talk about is, why do we do this as children? Well, there are a couple of reasons, but the main reason is this. In that moment, it was more safe for us to believe that we were the problem rather than our caregivers. So if dad acts in random or scary or unpredictable ways, me thinking that he is just out of control is way more scary than me believing that it's my fault, because it meant that I now can't trust him to keep me safe. He's unpredictable. He acts in weird ways. He's not trustworthy. He's not a trustworthy adult. So if we think about it, here we are as kids. We didn't understand that there was a reason for dad's bad mood. So we just saw it as random. And random is scary. And we cannot control random. So in that moment, it was better for us to think, if it's my fault, I can change my behavior and that will keep me safe. So, this flawed logic makes up the kinds of false beliefs or patterns of self blame that set us up for RSD later in life. Fun times. So, just to recap one more time, Mom is talking on the phone with Grandma, and and I come running up to her and I show her my artwork, and she pushes me away with a stern look. Well, maybe Mom just got bad news from Grandma, or maybe Mom has a really strained relationship with Grandma. No one really knows. But what we infer from that rejection, that probably had absolutely nothing to do with us at all, is that maybe our artwork is horrible, or maybe our passions are trivial. We could think of lots of different things that we could infer from that interaction. But the takeaway is that it was something that I did that made Mom reject me. But what really happened is that we had a misunderstanding. The next time, though, we might not be willing to show Mom our artwork because now we have the idea, whether it's true or false, and it's almost always false, we have the idea in our brains that showing her our artwork made her reject us, and that is too painful. It had nothing to do with us or our artwork. Mom probably had other stuff going on, and we just misinterpreted that. So the question then becomes, what do we do now? How do we heal from this? Well, that's a big process, but it starts with connecting with that small child who misunderstood these events. And in my Perception Connection program, we focus on identifying these deeply held false beliefs by sitting with our feelings and feeling them as deeply as we can. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this works. So when you feel a really intense reaction, like a rejection, but it could be any distress, really, we can sit with it and feel it deeply. And then we want to find the most accurate label for that emotion. So let's say that it's anger. We can ask ourselves, well, what kind of anger is it? Is it fury? Is it injustice? Is it resentment? And then what you're going to do is feel that really deeply and see if there's a memory that comes to you about a time when you felt that emotion before. Any memory earlier than this event is fine. If it's not from your childhood, that's okay, because often we can't get back that far, at least not right away. And I'm going to explain that in another video because it's too much for this video. But once we identify it, then we can work on reframing that belief by challenging its validity and replacing it with a more empowering narrative. So instead of thinking, when I run up to Daddy as soon as he gets home, it makes him mad, which is a self-blame and rejection belief, right? We can look at it from another lens. Now that we're older and we have the benefit of understanding that Dad was probably just really mad about being in traffic for the last 3 hours, and he didn't want to be touched as soon as he walked in through the door. So at this place where we are right now, we can see logically how we misinterpreted that. We can sit with that and that sad, hurt child, and we can reparent them with a lot of different strategies that I teach. But the important part is seeing that this was a misunderstanding. That little girl living in your subconscious needs to hear from you that her daddy didn't reject her. He was upset. He may have expressed that poorly, as we all do sometimes, but that wasn't his fault. And the way that she interpreted it wasn't her fault. There is no one to blame. And the point is not to blame anyone. So without going into a big story about what a jerk Dad was for brushing her off, which isn't helpful to anyone, we can simply tell that little girl that she is very much loved, she is valued, she is important, and she is worthy. And we can learn the tools to do that for every little girl inside of us who still harbors those apparent rejections that she's clung to all of these years, and maybe even decades. And I want to say one other thing as well, that this doesn't happen overnight. This isn't a one and done. People in my class, it took me decades to learn how to do this. And we go through it for 10 weeks. And even then we have a class weekly where we can continue to pull up these things that upset us, and we can talk about them, and we can work through them from a shifted perspective. And so it does take some time, but I know that you can get there, and it's all just a matter of looking at things through a different lens. But here's the kicker. It's not just about shifting those false beliefs. This is a 3-part process for getting out of RSD. So we also have to look at a couple of other things that go hand in hand with subconscious patterns of beliefs. And those are neurotransmitters and nervous system regulation. And Yeah, if you're not familiar with one or both of those, it might sound psychobabbly, but please bear with me. Neurotransmitters are those little chemical messengers in your brain that affect your mood and emotions. If they're out of whack or out of balance, you're going to feel it. Those of us who either have diagnosed ADHD or are prone to manic episodes, to extreme emotions, those of us who react poorly to stress and get overwhelmed easily, much of the time when we run your functional lab tests, we see that we burn through dopamine very slowly. So we have this abundance of dopamine and often not enough serotonin. Or put another way, we have too much of the go-go juice and not enough of the feel-good sauce. And so along with that comes anxiety and brain fog and overwhelm. And those lead to RSD sometimes, especially when we use them, when we feel them in conjunction with these false beliefs that we have. So figuring out what your own dopamine, serotonin, and GABA levels are doing, and then starting on a customized supplement protocol can really help stabilize your emotions from a brain perspective. And that's what I call anchoring one end of the three-ended rope. So we're holding one side down so that then we only have two more that are flailing, and then we can work on those two. And then the last one, the last end of the rope, is the autonomic nervous system, especially the vagus nerve. And this regulates your stress responses. So fight or flight, shutdown mode, also ventral vagal when we're calm and we're relaxed and we're able to connect in a social way. If that is out of balance or it has a lack of tone, is what we call it, you're going to be really sensitive to anything that feels like a threat, including rejection. And there are a ton of free and easy ways to start to tone your vagus nerve. And certainly I can chat about some of these in another video if you want to hear about that. But I'm going to be honest, those take time and effort. Free equals less effective and takes longer to accomplish. And so two of the things that you probably don't have, especially if you're a mom and you have ADHD and you probably have your own business that you're trying to work on, and if you're all of those things and you're also bordering on survival mode, then time and effort are two things that you probably don't have. So using a technique that I use, which is called the Safe and Sound Protocol, that is hands-off. It's the easiest method that you can use to get from point A to point B. You sit back and you listen to music. I'm there to co-regulate and jump in if anything funky happens with your re-regulation process, which it can from time to time. This is a very powerful tool, but you just have to show up and put on some headphones. And so all of these methods that we use to tone the vagus nerve, they all promote calm, no matter which ones you choose to go with, if they're done correctly and used consistently. They will make it easier to handle certain situations without having your brain get hijacked because it perceives a neutral event as a rejection, which, of course, now that we've gone through this, we now see it as a threat because we see it as a loss of love. And as a child, that means that we wouldn't survive. And even though we're not children anymore, when we get triggered, which is, of course, a common buzzword that I think everybody gets, we hop right back into the child's lens. And there we are, back at 3 or 4 years old again, emotionally speaking, all over again. And so I'm going to wrap this up. It's getting a little bit long, but all of these elements, false beliefs, neurotransmitter balance, and nervous system regulation, they all affect one another. When you reduce your stress through nervous system regulation, that can raise your serotonin and bring down your dopamine. And in that calmer, more peaceful state, it's much easier to shift your false beliefs. It's all connected. And that's why I call this a snowball trifecta, because all three of these pieces start rolling in the wrong direction, and that builds and builds and builds. But when we can get a couple of those rolling in the right direction, then we can get it to a manageable size. And in that state, we aren't as affected by perceived rejection anymore. And then it gets really fun because then we can start to look at what we call recognition responsive euphoria. But that is going to wait till another day. So, ladies, if you got anything at all from what I've shared here today, please leave a like on the video, subscribe if you feel like doing that, because it does help bring my message to more and more people. And that is why I do this work, to help us all move the needle in the direction of a more calm, heart-centered, and loving world where we can all accept one another for who we are and not be so reactive to our old wounds. Thanks again for watching, and I do hope to see you here again soon.